Hey Wargamers, welcome back to the channel, Death from Above Wargaming. I'm Aaron and I'm back tonight with another mech review. This time we're going to take a look at some big boys, some 80 tonners. Which one should you choose? Well, we've got two good ones tonight, courtesy of our friend and subscriber, Chris Miller. So Chris, thank you for this most excellent recommendation. So Chris really wanted to stack the Thug up against another mech. Now the Thug is pretty tough. It's got lots of armor, a pair of PPCs, twin SRM6s. The one we're looking at is the 11E. So I decided to stack it up against the Victor 9K to be precise, which is incidentally the same as the 9D. I guess according to the lore, the 9K just uses different components, which I can only presume are shipped from Capella in space, driving the cost down, of course. So it's like the cheap Chinese refit of the 9D, but we're looking at the 9K tonight. It's functionally identical again to the 9D. Drops that AC-20 for a Gauss rifle. It's got some pulse laser action on there. Very good mech. It does have jump jets, a little bit less armor than the Thug. So these mechs are within 77 battle value of each other. So very, very close matchup here, especially for mechs of this size. So excited to see which one comes out on top. So guys, stay tuned. We're going to run them right through the ringer here of Battlytics. It's coming right up. All right, guys, let's start with the Thug. This thing is so cool looking. You know, I just love the, it's got the hands and the giant guns, and it's sort of that big hunched over look. It just looks like a Thug. So this is the 11E. So this is the original bad boy, built back in 2572. And actually, fun fact, this was built as a competitor to the Warhammer, as you know, also sporting two PPCs, but lacking the hands that the Thug has. So this was built all the way back in 2572. And then, of course, everybody forgot how to build endosteel chassis, and so they couldn't build this particular variant anymore. And then when the clan invasion rolled around, right, they had the Helm Memory Core, they got the technology, Earthworks, and I believe it was Maltex is the name of the other one. They started putting this thing back into production. So very cool story. This thing is 1640 in terms of BV. It is 80 tons, thus an assault mech, and persists throughout the timeline. This is a great mech. It's around forever. And one of the things I loved about this mech, which you know I love, is standard fusion engines. One of my favorite things on the refits. I just despise XL engines in Classic. It is such a handicap. But you know, the standard fusion engine on this mech, combined with 15.5 tons of standard armor, it's a beast. 100% armor coverage on an 80-ton mech, scarier than the Grasshopper. It is just brutal to take this thing down. So what has it got? Two PPCs, one in each arm. We talked about that. Two SRM6s, left torso, right torso, respectively. And that ammunition is cased, making it even harder to kill. Remember, when you have case and you've got an XL engine, and it just doesn't matter. When you have case and you've got a standard engine, you lose half your body, but you're still in the fight with hopefully half your weapons. So this Thug, definitely mean, really solid armor distribution. And let's talk about the dissipation, guys. 36, so that's 18 double heat sinks, more than enough to handle what this thing brings to bear. Okay, so next up is the Victor 9K. Again, I joke, but it's so weird. There's the 9D, it's the same mech. I get them confused all the time because of that. I actually looked on Sarna. There really wasn't a whole lot of deep dive into the lore behind why there are two variants. It doesn't even say like one's like, Draconis Combine, or I mean, they're both Davian variants, I believe. Just one is built with different components, it says, whatever that means. Prime overnight delivery of your Victor parts for the 9K. You get battle value of 1717. It's an 80-ton chassis. So again, it's very close to the battle value of that Thug. I believe it's 77 BV difference is what we had said. This particular variant emerged in 3049. It took that venerable, Victor, right, with the AC-20, the SRM, the two medium lasers, which was great, except for, if anything engages you and can keep you at, 10 hexes, you're just screwed, right? You can't do anything. This one fixes that problem. This is the variant where I will field a Victor and be really thrilled with it, because you're swapping out the AC-20 for a Gauss rifle. Yeah, it does 5 points less damage, but it's also a heck of a lot less heat and a whole lot more range. So very cool. It's got 15 heat sinks on it. Standard heat sinks, same movement profile as before, 4.6 with jump capability, which is very cool for an 80-ton mech. And this is all made possible by an endosteel chassis. That's where it frees up all this extra tonnage. Its armor is a little lackluster. It's, I believe, 12.5 tons. I believe it's a little better than the 9B, or whatever that standard variant is. I think that one's 11.5 tons. So it's a little bit better, but it, again, still not anything I'd want to write home about. 81% coverage is good, but in this era, when you're fighting these types of big mechs with big guns that can decapitate like the clan weapons, you really need more coverage. I would absolutely think about downgrading those medium pulse lasers to regular medium lasers and slapping on 2 more tons of armor. But I digress. If we look at the center console here and we look at that mech, you can see the arms and legs right away, very under-armored. And that's where basically everything is. You've got your medium pulse lasers in the left arm, your Gauss in the right arm, and that SRM's in that left torso. Now, what do we have here? Well, we've got ammo in both the left and right torsos. We do have case as well, so all of that is exciting. So let's move on to the offensive analysis, and let's see what happens with these two 80-ton sluggers. All right, so here we are. These mechs just have too many heat sinks, I guess. There is no capacity to build up heat on either mech. What's interesting is, of course the Victor has jump jets, right? So you always want a little bit of capacity for jump jets. I get it, that's fine. I mean, honestly, if I were building a mech, I wouldn't leave capacity for jump jets. If you jump, well, you just got to cool down a little bit. I mean, you don't expect your mech to be jumping every turn. But for the Thug that doesn't have jump jets, I'm just surprised it has so many heat sinks. But it is what it is. So here you go. These mechs, again, big sluggers. They do a ton of damage. The Thug, 173.7 points of average calculated damage over the 12-turn simulation. That is, again, that's over 10 tons, 11 tons, I think, of standard armor. The Victor not far behind at 164.4, also a tremendous number. But if you look and see, where does the Thug outclass the Victor and vice versa, well, the Victor has it, you can see sort of the line for the Victor. It has it in longer ranges, but the Thug immediately pulls ahead at 12 inches when those PPCs hit medium range. So when you're at 12 hexes, 12 inches, and those PPCs have that modifier drop from a +4 to a +2, man, those things can start pounding in some damage. And then when you get those SRM-6s in play, that Victor almost never catches up until the PPCs are within minimum range. So that Thug will get outgunned at long range by the Victor, courtesy of the Gauss rifle, but once you get into medium range with this thing, that Thug is a beast. But again, both of these things very close, neck and neck. This is average calculated damage, and within 9 points, very close race so far. So let's take a look at the lethality and see if that tells us anything more. All right, so this is very close. Again, we can see that the Victor pulls ahead of the Thug almost immediately and stays ahead for quite some time. And then the Thug kind of catches up, and they're very close in lethality in the kill curve. The Victor has the decapitator. The Victor has a 15-point shot. I cannot stress how important those weapons are. And in fact, the lethality index, a little history of Battlytics, was actually built because of that, right? We wanted to show what's the difference between 4 medium lasers and an AC-20. On the tabletop it's different, but functionally, how does it look? So that's what this simulation shows. And you can see, even though that Thug has 2 10-point hits, that single 15-point shot, man, I mean, it's big, especially at long range. But when we look at the overall kill percentages, the Thug, again, catches up. Once it starts to do more damage, it's able to kill almost as much, and in fact, exceeds the Victor by just a small margin there. Could be within, margin of error 95.8% and 94.7%. So almost within 1% there, difference on the overall kills. And when you look at, though, the actual kill analysis, the Thug ends up having more head kills in the end. And I would imagine that's because of, if you hit the head with a 10-point shot and you follow up with some SRMs, right? I mean, that's pretty good. And so, that's what we're looking at here. That's what we've got going on. And in fact, something just dawned on me here. That Javelin that we're shooting at, I believe, has 10 head armor in total. So the Victor can claim kills earlier with the Gauss rifle and can likely core it out on the CT earlier as well. But once again, that Thug starts getting in medium range. Once those PPCs are churning and it has a better chance to hit, it looks like the simulation is showing us here that Thug is actually more capable of killing, just by a small margin there. So let's look at some of the other things. So damage per hit, we talked about this. Damage per hit, 7.9 on the Victor. The Gauss rifle, just brutal. Critical hits goes to the Thug. Again, when you're spraying 12 SRMs out, you're more likely to generate critical hits. Time to kill, very similar, within 0.3 of a turn. So again, overall, in terms of lethality, these mechs are very different. It's expressed a little bit differently. The Victor does a little bit better at range than the Thug. It gets kills earlier than the Thug, but because the Thug is able to deliver the same amount or a little bit more damage over time, it eventually catches up. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that when we look at the defensive simulation, we're going to see the Thug start pulling ahead because, again, at 15.5 tons, 100% armor coverage, it's a little tougher than that Victor, but let's check it out and see. All right, well, I was wrong. So I was expecting a much more dramatic change in survivability here, but the Victor is actually pretty tough as well. Surprisingly, 15.5 tons of armor sounds real good, but I guess 12.5 tons is just enough. The Thug only barely ekes out the survivability win here by about 3%. The Victor at 88.7%, the Thug at 91.5%, which both of these numbers are astronomically high. That means in a slugfest, a one-on-one against an awesome, that Thug is surviving 91% of the time, over 91.5% of the time in 12 turns. And that's just assuming it's running at the awesome, just getting shot at, just eating a hail of PPC fire. Same thing with the Victor, very impressive. So far, these mechs are very, very close. Really not much to say. The only interesting thing I will point out, though, is ammo critical chance by location. And I'm surprised it's not reflected more. I mean, I guess because they're cased, it doesn't really matter. But you have a 50% chance of hitting that SRM ammo if you penetrate the left torso. It's like SRM 4, and I think there's maybe a heat sink in there. There's something else in there. Maybe it's a jump jet. There's only one thing else in that left torso. That's it. So you have a 50-50 shot at nailing that ammo, which is pretty scary. Conversely, on the side of the Thug, it's a much lower percent, 11.1% to hit either the SRM 6 in the left or right torso. So those critical slots very well packed out in those side torsos there. And again, that's courtesy of all those double heat sinks. So, some benefit there, I guess, of having too many heat sinks. Okay, so mobility is interesting here. So the Thug and the Victor have basically the same target mod degradation over 12 turns. 1.9 on the Thug, 1.8 on the Victor. That's like barely nothing. And I was surprised to see this considering the Victor had such weak leg armor, but it makes up for it with the jump jets, right? It can maintain that target mod, which is pretty cool. The Thug basically just doesn't take any hits. So this is where that thick armor comes into play. 0.08 motive hits per game. The susceptibility analysis, right? You look at that, right? It's much higher on the Victor than it is on the Thug. The other interesting thing is in the Thug, it only has 4 of 6 critical slots packed out. So inner sphere heat sinks take up too many critical slots, double heat sinks, I'm sorry. You can't stuff them in the legs. So the Thug is sort of screwed in that regard, whereas the Victor, has the jump jets and things like that, so it can pack out those critical slots. But again, overall, very similar in terms of mobility. So with one mech, you're making up for it with jump jets. The other one, you're just making up for it with thick leg armor. The Victor, I think, is going to win the mobility just because it has the jump jets. You're going to be able to get up steep mountains quicker. You're going to jump over buildings in an urban setting. You can outmaneuver your opponent in ways that the Thug simply cannot do. But when you consider the Thug's got the PPCs on the arms, it's got very nice arc of fire. So again, when I think about all of these things, this is actually a really, really good matchup so far. So let's get to the efficiency. That's my favorite part, as you know. These two mechs, again, about 77 battle value different. What's it going to look like? I'm very interested in the gunnery sensitivity as well. So let's check that out. Okay, so here we are. Let's look at the effectiveness. So the purple area represents your effective ACD. Again, that's a combination of your optimized ACD multiplied by your survivability at each point over the turn for the defensive and offensive simulations. You get a number, and we measure the damage loss in form of percent. Both of these mechs saw very little damage loss. We like to see 10% or less. These mechs at 3.4 and 4.2% respectively. If only there was an opportunity, we could drop some heat sinks, we could add some more weapons. If there was an opportunity to overheat this mech, push the envelope on that baseline damage, we could probably make up for that net loss, and you might see some better numbers here. But overall, again, these are incredibly low damage loss numbers, and that's attributed to just simply how tough these mechs are. Efficiency. There it is. The Thug wins. So as far as bang for buck goes, that Thug is at a 7.3 efficiency, the Victor at a 6.55. Now, both of these mechs to the right of the peak. That means they're both very good. They're better than average. You can see the bell curve. That's all of the mechs. That gray line, by the way, is every mech we've ever run through Battlytics. I built this, basically a bell curve. Where do they shake out? Interestingly enough, the average is right around a 5, which is pretty cool. And so, these mechs to the right of that looks good. So that's great. Let's look at the sensitivity here. So the Thug, way more sensitive to a gunnery upskill than the Victor. Why is that? Well, there's a couple of things. If you remember back to the offensive simulation, the Thug really had to wait until we get into medium range before we saw this massive uptick in damage. Imagine if you could bring the whole curve up if you moved it from gunnery 3 to gunnery 2, or gunnery 4 to gunnery 2, right? And so on and so forth, right? So the Thug, absolutely more sensitive to better gunnery. The other piece, the Victor has 2 medium pulse lasers. They're awesome. Those weapons are basically built in with, gunnery skill improvement of 2 because of the -2 modifier. So you're not going to get as much out of the Victor when it comes to a better pilot. If you put a crappy pilot in the Victor, like a 4-skill pilot, it's actually almost as efficient as the Thug if the Thug also had a 4-skill pilot. But you see very, very marginal gains as you improve that Victor over time, which is unfortunate because you sort of need that good gunnery to make use of that Gauss rifle if you want to play it in a long-range setting. But at the same time, the better pilot is sort of worthless in close with those medium pulsars, sort of nets out, right? So it's an interesting conundrum, if you will. Meanwhile, the Thug, you can see that line just skyrockets, right? You start at 5.42 with a skill 4, gunnery of 4, all the way up to 8.43 with gunnery 0. The more you put in, the better it gets. That includes all of the latest, errata on piloting and gunnery skill, increases to BV and all of that stuff. So that's efficiency. The last thing we have here is threat and roles. We'll start with the Thug, we'll get to the Victor, and we'll wrap this thing up. All right, so here we are. This is a pretty meaty threat curve. Now, the one thing about these mechs that rely on PPCs for their long range is there is a definitive gap, right? They don't start shooting until 18 inches or 18 hexes, unless you're playing with extreme range rules, but even still, it's an even bigger gap at that point. But there's a gap. You've got a few rounds if you've got faster LRM-equipped opponents where you're going to have to hoof it and try to chase them down to get those PPCs in range. But once they get in range, they are lethal. Now, what's interesting here, right, you see no maximum ACD because that's always the same as 0 heat ACD. We mentioned this on both mechs. There's just no ability to push these mechs. You can't build up heat. Is what it is. But you can see how that white jumps closer to the Alpha Strike capability at 12 inches. So what does that mean? So the closer those two bars are, right, that the higher the white bar gets, the closer it gets to that Alpha Strike potential. Is you think of it like this is the percent of my Alpha Strike capability that I'm actually going to be able to deliver. So when they're that close, that's a really good thing. That means that's where you want to be. And you know, again, this just gets better again at 6 inches when you hit the short range bracket with the PPCs. Obviously, when you get to 9 inches, the Alpha Strike capability jumps up a whole lot, but you're just spraying SRM6 everywhere, and so you know the likelihood that you're going to hit with all 12 missiles and do 24 damage is not as likely. But let's look at some key statistics here. So our peak ACD happens at 3 inches. This is where you're going to absolutely brutalize people. You're on average, if you Alpha Strike, you're going to do 27.8 damage on average. That's pretty brutal. Your peak Alpha Strike is actually 44 if you hit with everything. The thing with this mech, I think you guys probably know this, you want to blow some holes in things with the PPC, then you close in, right? You get within 6 inches, so those SRMs are within medium range. You get some good hits with them, and you're just generating crits, right? That's what this thing does. It's awesome. It's really good in that regard. We talked about the threat envelope in the mobility section. Because it has the PPCs on the arms, it can swing left, right. You can do a lot of great things with it. You can torso twist and secondary target somebody off to the other side. You can do all sorts of great things. So overall, I think this mech, really well designed, heavily armored. So you're not at, like the Warhammer, for example, you're at risk when you lose an arm. You know, the arms are not as heavily armored as you will see on this Thug. This Thug has so much armor for days. So let's talk about the roles for this thing. Brawler. You're like, whoa, it's got PPCs. WTF, Aaron? Well, I will tell you, this thing does a crap load of damage in close. The closer you get, the more lethal it is. Just stay out at 3 hexes. That's it. Even if you're at 3, you're still in sort of minimum range of the PPC, but forget about it. The +1 ain't no thing. You're never building up heat with this mech. Just pull the trigger. Just don't let them get any closer than that, and you will be fine. Defending. I think this mech, again, tough as nails. It's got the PPCs. It can keep targets at bay. And if things are dumb enough to get close, which they have to when you're defending, allegedly, they're going to try to cap the objective, cap the base. They're just going to be eating SRMs. So, like I just mentioned, you blow the holes in them with the PPC, and you just spray weak targets with your SRMs. You get a lot of crits, very effective that way. Lastly, as a frontline mech, we talked about toughness. I'll say it again. This thing is tough, tough, tough. It's got damage across the board. You can charge it up the middle, let it be the focal point of the enemy. It can absorb a lot of punishment and still do a lot of damage in return. And you never have to worry about building up heat and having this thing slow down. Phenomenal. So overall, I really like this mech. Again, great efficiency. Definitely a mech that I need to buy, and I'm going to go head over to Ares Games and Minis, I think, and buy this mech. Before I get crazy with buying mechs, let's check out the Victor. Okay, so this curve looks very different. It's longer, it does not peak as high, but overall, I think it's still very, very strong. Let's take a look at some of the key metrics. So again, we talked about the heat. Your peak ACD is 26.9 damage all the way at 2 inches. The closer you get, the better. The peak Alpha Strike is 35 points of damage at 6 inches. So its Alpha Strike is just less than the Thug, period. But the Thug is also relying on 12 missiles hitting. This thing has a lot more direct fire to bring to bear. So that is something certainly to consider when you're just thinking about these raw threat numbers. The threat envelope on the Victor is not bad at all. It's got the pulse lasers on the one arm. Pulse lasers don't shoot very far. It's got the Gauss rifle on the right arm. That thing is just stone cold killer. You got great line of sight, great arc of fire. You can bring, you can sort of torso twist and shoot behind you with the Gauss rifle. You can do some great things with your jump jets. while shooting your Gauss rifle. Overall, I think, the threat on this mech is just fine. Now, when I think about rolls for this mech, it's mostly the same, but slightly different than the Thug. Also, I think this mech makes a great brawler. There's 2 reasons why. So first of all, the obvious one, it's got a pair of pulse lasers and an SRM4. And the Gauss rifle really doesn't have awful minimum range. But the second reason is, remember the gunnery sensitivity. So if you want to make bang for buck out of this mech, put a crappier pilot in it, honestly, like a skill 4 guy. It's not going to cost you a lot. 1700's a lot, but it's not going to cost you as much as, if you had like a skill 2 pilot in it, and just get it in close. Try to mitigate some of that high skill with, just range, right? So that's something to consider with this. So I think it's a decent brawler. For the same reasons, I picked a cavalry mech. It's got jump jets. It's not as fast as you might want. It can't get across the field tremendously quickly, but it can keep up. It can keep up with a pack of Wolverines or, something along those lines, some 5.8 mechs. It could be the slow man in the, in the group there. But again, it's got the Gauss rifle. It can kind of get in there, still be dealing damage, and then finally close that last leg of the gap. It won't get tangled up on terrain because of the jump jets. Has the heat capacity to use them frequent and often. So that's why I picked cavalry for this mech. And then lastly is a frontline mech. So despite the 12.5 tons of armor, the Victor did prove to be very tough. Still has case, a lot of things going on there. So I think overall, this could play a very good frontline role. There's really no other role I think I would put this mech in. It really wasn't a question for me. Again, the gunnery sensitivity tells me that you want to kind of get this mech into medium and short range as quickly as you can. I think that's the key here. Get those medium pulse lasers into play, field it with a weaker pilot, and I think you won't be disappointed with the Victor 9K or 9D, whichever you prefer. Either you're buying top shelf components or the cheap Capellan equivalent, whichever one you choose. So that said, guys, that wraps up this mech review, our 80-ton slugfest shootout smackdown. Which one would I pick? I think I have to go with the Thug, but both of these mechs, I think very good. If I was going to play the Victor, I would definitely strip off those medium pulse lasers and put on regular old medium lasers. And I might actually swap out that SRM4 for maybe a long-range missile pack. It's what I did in one of our campaigns with the Victor and the Royalston Grenadiers. And it's a small LRM pack, but you know what? It adds up over time as you're closing. And so, that's what I think I would do. But anyway, I digress. We're done. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. About 50% of you watch and don't subscribe. Subscribing is the #1 way and the easiest way you can help the channel. So if you like what you see and you appreciate our content, please click that subscribe button, and we would very much appreciate it. Don't forget to check out our friend Derek over at Ares Games and Minis. Grab yourself a Victor, pick yourself up a Thug. Ares has them all. He will also be stocking the Kickstarter stuff, I am sure, so keep your eyes open for that. That is on the near horizon. But guys, that's about it. Check us out online on our website, Facebook, Discord, etc., etc., etc. Don't forget to stream our soundtrack. You can get that on Amazon Music, iTunes, Spotify. All the streaming services have it. Just look for Death From Above Wargaming, and the name of the album is War Games. Very cool. Shocking. I know. It wasn't very creative, but I thought it was cool. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. Have a great night. Always great stuff coming from Death From Above Wargaming.